I speak to you in the name of God, who suffered on a cross, descended to the dead, and raised to new life. Over the past week, the other clergy have been preaching about Peter, telling some of his story. And we've just heard the Passion reading from the Gospel according to Mark, and Peter has the significant role that we all know, but perhaps a little less than what we find in some of the other Gospels. Peter, as is foretold, denies Jesus 3 times. In the lead up to Jesus' arrest and his trial and his beating, before the crucifixion, Peter pledged to Jesus that he would not desert him, that he would not leave. Peter is following, sort of in the background, in the shadows, trying to go unrecognized. And yet, because of his accent, because he had been seen with Jesus, because of who he was, he's recognized. And for anyone trying to save themselves some kind of trouble or worse, he denies that he knows Jesus. After the last denial, when he hears the second cock crow, he breaks down and weeps. And then, at least in the Gospel according to Mark, we don't hear from Peter again. Peter, too, disappears from the story, at least for now. In that moment of humanity, in that moment of desperation, I think most of us could put ourselves in Peter's place. In perhaps moments of more certain spiritual growth and depth, we might think that we would stand up, that we would speak, that we would be called to account for being one of Jesus' followers. But most of us, in a moment of humility and in a moment of honesty, in a moment of vulnerability, recognize that we too, like Peter, would probably deny Jesus in those moments. Over the past weeks of the season of Lent, one of our study groups for Super Tuesday has been reading this book, which was the bishop's choice of a study book for Lent, a book by Paula Gooder called Let Me Go There. She has this reflection on the disciples. The disciples in Mark seem often to be on the cusp of true learning and recognition, but they're never completely there. The factor to bear in mind as we read Mark is that almost certainly his audience knew that Jesus' disciples were now filled by the Spirit and proclaiming the good news of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, to the ends of the earth. That's the story after the resurrection. They may not have begun as well as we might have hoped. That's because for most of us, we recognize that the disciples are maybe not the disciples that we would have chosen. Maybe they look a little bit too much like us. Maybe we see ourselves in some of their questions, and maybe in some of their failings. When Peter took Jesus aside to rebuke him for just suggesting that Jesus foretelling his own death meant that they would all have to die. Peter had, of course, strikingly got it both right and wrong. He recognized who Jesus really was, but then he took it upon himself to tell Jesus what this meant. The disciples that Jesus chose may not have been the ones that we would have chosen, but they were the ones that he chose. They were chosen by God. Were they the ones that he had in mind? Quite possibly. Because later, they demonstrated that they had done what disciples were supposed to do. They had learned, and they had taken that learning, and they had applied it, and they had lived it out. So even in Peter's denial of Jesus, even in that dark moment when perhaps he had run away and he couldn't bear to see Jesus hanging on the cross, even in those darkest moments, there is still hope. The light still shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. It's only Friday. The week isn't over yet. Because at the beginning of the week, at the dawn of the new week, everything is about to change. All of the denials, all of the imperfections, all of the mistakes, all get wiped away. And in fact, in the face of, in the spite of all of those, the light shines. We wouldn't be here today if it weren't for that rock upon which the church is built. Recognizing his full humanity. That Peter was able to see Jesus' humanity. That Peter, despite all of his mistakes and even those glorious moments, very briefly when he got it right, that Peter held on to something, that Peter saw something, and that even in those deepest moments of self-doubt, that God descended to those depths to lift him out of it. We are here for that same hope. Even looking at all of the troubles and the ills of the world that surround us, the potential of being dismayed, of being brought low. That hope that sparked the early church, that hope that Peter found, even in the darkest moments, that brought him back. That hope is why we are here today. Jesus chose Peter to be that rock. Maybe the rock was chipped, maybe it was cracked. So are any of us. That is the basis for the church that has been built. That is the basis of why we are here. Upon that rock, the church is built, and the gates of hell have not prevailed against it. May you find that same hope in the darkness of this noon on Good Friday, so that you can be filled with joy at the dawn with the light as it comes on Easter morn. Amen.